I'm now going to hand over to Mairéad Forsythe, who's on the Executive Committee of Dublin's Cycling Campaign. Mairéad, thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Conor, and welcome to everybody. Thanks very much for joining us in this, the final webinar of the Dublin Cycling Campaign series to mark Bike Week 2020. Bike Week 2020 should have happened in June, but at least it's happening this week. So thank you all for joining us for our executive discussion panel. As Conor said, I'm Mairéad Forsythe. I'm on the executive of the Dublin Cycling Campaign, and I'll be chairing the session this afternoon on the future of cycling in Dublin. And I'd like to introduce you to our panel and to thank them all for coming along from their busy days to join us this afternoon. And we've got Hugh Creegan, the Deputy CEO of the National Transport Authority. You might give a wave there, Hugh.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks. Brendan O'Brien, Head of Technical Services in Dublin City Council.
Hi, guys.
Mick Mulhern is the Director of Planning and Transport in South Dublin County Council. Jane Hackett is the Senior Programme Manager with Taisce. And we also have Kevin Baker, the Chairperson of the Dublin Cycling Campaign.
Hi there.
So, thanks all for coming this evening. And I'm going to throw out with, by asking everybody, each of the panelists, to give a 1-minute introduction to themselves and to tell us about an achievement by which we would know the results of their labours. So we'll start maybe with Brendan O'Brien.
All right, okay. Thanks, Mairéad. I thought you were going to do Hugh first, you know, who's got far more achievements than any of us. But
you were first on my screen, so that's why I asked you.
Okay, fair enough. Brendan O'Brien, I'm I suppose in charge of the transportation element of Dublin City Council, and spanning a number of different things from day-to-day traffic management to projects and so on. And I did see the question because you've kindly sent around just beforehand. And I was kind of, instead of kind of going for an achievement or something that you know, was just myself or whatever, I was kind of going to go for an achievement for the city, and it was a simple one around accidents and road fatalities. So I first started here in 1997, and in 1997 there was 53 fatalities on Dublin City Council roads, of which 31 of them were pedestrians. 30 were pedestrians, 1 was cyclist. So a horrendous figure. Last year was 7. So while every fatality is a tragedy, undoubtedly a lot of the changes that so many people, whether it's from TI, the old NRA, you know, all the various different agencies have really, over the years, have really tried to make the city a safer place. And you know, this is a constant element. And so one of the achievements of the city, I think, is the Dublin Port Tunnel, which really was the impetus for the rise of cycling and the impetus for the fall in fatalities in the city.
Okay, thanks very much, Brendan. And now maybe I will go to Hugh and ask him to introduce himself.
Thanks, Mairéad. I head up transport planning and transport investment in the MTA, and that covers everything from cycling through to walking, through to public transport, covering bus, rail, and metro effectively. So it's we span a considerable amount of activities within the MTA. I'm wary of pointing to any particular success item. Maybe I'd like to point to a possible future success. I think if we succeed in delivering bus connects, which is both for bus and cycling, I think that'll be the one I'll be proudest of eventually if we get there. Back to you, Mairéad.
Okay, thanks very much, Hugh. Maybe I'll go to Jane next. You're on mute, Jane. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm mute. I was trying to unmute there. So hi everybody, thanks a million for inviting me on to speak with such a diverse and accomplished group of people. So I am the manager with Green Schools. We've achieved a lot over the last decade, really. The team have been fantastic engaging with schools, and we've achieved a lot, and I think we've been very much part of the growth of cycling culture in Ireland over the last decade. I suppose the one thing I'd be proud of is that we give children a voice, and we've allowed children to become part of the conversation when it comes to what they need And hopefully that's what we can continue to do, really. So that's what I'm proud of. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Jen. We go next to Mick.
Hi, so I'm Mick Mulhern. I'm the Director of Planning and Transport in South Dublin. I'm new into South Dublin, new into working in Dublin, new into working in Ireland. Just over 12 months ago, I came back from 17 years in London, and I think I'll kind of nick some of Hugh's piece about maybe less of what I've actually delivered in South Dublin. I think we're starting from a base that probably isn't as good as we would like it to be. But over the last couple of years, the team have delivered 6 or 7 quite good projects. The Grange Greenway cycle link has seen an increase about 65% of people on that. That's a really good project, which I don't see any reason why we can't emulate and do more on. And I suppose the biggest thing that we're working on in the council since I've joined is what we're calling Cycle South Dublin, and an initiative which we actually brought to our SPC last night about rolling out 200 kilometres of cycle lane across Dublin across South Dublin over the next 10 years. So that's a programme which we've been working on internally for about the last 5 or 6 months, and we'll be going out to public consultation on in the we'll bring it to hopefully get through our council in November. But I think that's an initiative that the team have been working on behind closed doors quite a bit over the last few months. So we'll see how that goes, and fingers crossed that's something this time next year we can look back on and be well on our way on that.
That's great. Thanks very much, Mick. Look forward to all of that. And now can I ask Kevin to introduce himself?
Yeah, okay. So kind of as chair of an advocacy organization, I suppose one of our kind of big roles is trying to just get as many people involved in the process as possible. And I suppose kind of the 2 big things for me have always been kind of the Fitzwilliam Cycle Route campaign was the first ever campaign I ran with Dublin Cycling Campaign. And we were just really delighted to see like 1,700 people from across Dublin kind of put in very positive comments on that project. And then the other one has been kind of Bus Connects in particular, was trying to kind of coordinate a large team of kind of volunteers in Dublin Cycling Campaign to kind of dissect each of the routes, figure out what works really well for cycling, how can we improve it, and how can we make these routes safe for all, but then encourage as many people as possible to kind of echo that voice through. So those are kind of my big 2 things.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Kevin. Now, another little bit of getting to know you. This is Bike Week, and I think a lot of us have been working from home, attending webinars, etc., and maybe not doing much cycling. So I'd like each of you to recall when you first learned to ride a bike. And this has been brought to mind by seeing kids learning to ride during COVID. So maybe we'll go around a different direction this time. We'll start with Jane. Can you talk about how you learned to ride a bike, Jane?
Well, the funny thing is my parents didn't let me cycle. So that came to bite them really now, because that's all I talk about is cycling. But I lived quite in the inner city, I suppose, of Dublin. So it wasn't a great place to learn to cycle, but my aunt had a huge house and a big green space, and my cousin had a chopper bike. So it was classic, like late 70s, learn on the chopper. And ever since that, I was kind of hooked. But I didn't really start cycling till I was in my 20s. I was that generation. I was the one who slipped through the net, and now I'm cycling pretty much every day, thankfully.
That's great. Slow start. Well done. What about you, Mick? How did you learn to ride a bike?
Well, I don't cycle. And I think the reason why I don't cycle is because I think the cycle network in Dublin is pretty poor, and it feels pretty unsafe to me as a non-confident cyclist. So I don't. I'd love to, and I think we need to do a lot more to get to that place. But no, I don't. I mean, I can obviously, but I don't. So yeah, because I think there's a problem.
Well, I think we'll get to tackle some of those issues this afternoon. How about yourself, Hugh? What was your experience?
So long ago, I've forgotten at this stage. All I can say is I grew up in a rural area where, yes, if you weren't able to transport yourself, you weren't going to get anywhere. So I think at a very young age, we all were cycling. When exactly that was, I'd certainly, I'm a decade earlier than Jane is anyway. It was back in the 60s.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll get back to that where everybody in rural areas will be cycling. And yourself, Brendan, What was your experience?
My experience, well, my mother taught me to cycle and bought me, I think it was a Rally 20 was the bike at the time. So I think I was cycling from about 7 or 8. The Rally 20 came to a bad end. My brother managed to get it robbed from outside Connolly Station, so that put a kibosh for a while. I was well, I learned to cycle quite early. You know, the type of job I had for years was I was kind of traveling around the country and so on, so I wasn't really cycling. And I suppose what really got me back into cycling was when VeloCity was here in 2005, and we had the offer of the bike, the reduced price from Rally, and it was kind of, there was no excuse anymore for me not to do it. So since then I've been cycling all the time. So it's my main mode of transportation around the city.
Okay, that's great to hear. Thanks. And yourself, Kevin?
Yeah, I started very young. I was kind of started with friends, kind of 6 or 7, kind of cycling around our neighborhood. Had a definite biker gang going to some extent. And then I think kind of the big moment for me was kind of when I hit 11, off to go to secondary school. My mother was kind of determined I would follow my brothers and cycle to school. So kind of from there on, I was kind of cycling outside of my neighborhood into kind of the wider area. Only possible now that I look back because of 3 holes in 3 walls that kind of connected certain like residential streets together that got me to school. But yeah, that was kind of how I got started.
So was that official permeability or unofficial, would you say?
Oh no, all of them were official.
Yeah.
It was the Baker gang, was it?
Yeah, and a lot of the kids from neighboring houses as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Famed and terrorized the neighborhood at the same time.
I hope not, but maybe we did. Yeah.
I'm sure there was a chopper or two, was there?
I think he's way too young for the
choppers.
choppers.
True, actually. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, a little bit.
Did I not do a kind of a retro one recently?
Yeah.
The big thing when I was young was everyone was getting mountain bikes with the biggest suspension you could possibly get was the big thing.
It's amazing how different eras brought different things into fashion. So maybe we get on now to a kind of more serious topic. And I suppose I'll aim the first question at Hugh. And ask the rest of you to come in later. When did you first realise that cycling has a significant role to play as part of the transport solution?
Well, I've been involved with transport a long time now, so it's fair to say I think I would have always known that cycling was certainly a component part of it, and in my career before I was with the NTA, I was with the NRA, the roads body who were building the motorways and the various secondary routes around Ireland. And even back there, we became very conscious, probably in the early noughties, that actually, particularly on secondary roads, they needed to be designed for all users, rather than just, as had been the case, designed for cars only. So I think short answer is I was always aware of it. But the point at which it began to become more legitimate in terms of providing identified facilities was probably in the early noughties. And obviously in more recent years with the NTA, like it's become a major focus, as you all know.
Okay, thanks very much, Hugh. Brendan, do you want to views on that?
Well, I suppose there's a number of things there. You know, if you go back, we've got some reasonably good records from years ago. So if you go back to, I think it was a 1953 cordon count, you know, and you realize that the bicycle was the mainstay at that particular time. And then as you go through the 80s and up to the 90s, you saw this dramatic decline, which was the same in a huge amount of cities. But it was that dramatic decline, and you know, gradually starting to bring that back up, and there was a lag period between us even trying to do something for cycling and any kind of growth in cycling. In fact, Owen Creegan, when he was director of traffic, used to say that the more cycle lanes we put in, the less cyclists we have. So we should stop putting them in case we eradicate them altogether. But I guess there's a number of kind of things, and you can look at it from the kind of space constraints. You can look at it from, you know, what would you need to get additional numbers of people through any of our streets, you know, by car, by bike, by public transport. And that's where, you know, what we're trying to do and have tried to do over the last while is really stop treating it as what would you say, as a toy or something that can be pandered to or fitted in if you have enough space. Really what we're trying to do is say it's a mode of transportation. It needs a certain amount of thought about it, needs a certain amount of design and implementation, but it's a mode of transportation, and that was what was quite heartening. The way things were going pre-COVID was that on certain of our routes like Rathmines and to a certain extent Fairview, you know, we had more cyclists than we had car users on the North Wall. You know, we had changed that around in 10 years time from a predominance of cars to actually again having more cyclists in those areas. So that was really, I suppose, the kind of driver, and the fact that you could grow those areas, you could grow that without, you know, having to rip up the city or, you know, try and put in additional lanes. And that's a key element of cycling infrastructure and cycling as a mode of transport.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Brendan, maybe I'll go to Kevin next. When did you realise?
Yeah, I suppose like I came from this from the very personal point of view. Like my advocacy started with kind of being fed up trying to cycle down the North Quays into work without kind of getting run over. And I think I just had one particularly bad day. I had 2 bad close passes, and then a van clipped me on my right shoulder heading into work. And I kind of went to the guards afterwards with the reg plate of the vehicle and a full description, and I got kind of nothing back from them. And I felt like, okay, it's time for me to do something to keep me safe. But over time, I think my advocacy has much more changed into how do we help get more people cycling? How do we make this a realistic option for way more people? So it was like me realizing that cycling is a congestion buster to some extent was maybe 18 months, 2 years ago. But like cycling as it can be made a viable option for kind of everyone of all ages and all abilities, maybe about 1.5 years ago as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Kevin. And Mick, would you like to give us your view of when you realised that cycling could be significant?
I think for me, I think growing up, like I said at the beginning, I didn't really cycle, didn't really have a cycle gang, the bike bust or whatever. And I think like when you would go to places like the Netherlands or whatever, and you would see, you know, where they're now at with a mode share of 50%, albeit it wasn't like that maybe in the early 2000s, it wasn't quite that high, but you could see it happening there. And I think for me, living in London about 8, 9, nearly 10 years ago, they introduced what they called cycle superhighways and quiet ways across London. And they were rolled out at pace and, you know, comprehensively across the city. And all of a sudden, my friends were now cycling to work as viable, where we would have got the tube in or whatever previously. They were doing it and getting quite into it. It was never quite for me, but I could see people doing it. I could see people take it. You know, they were no longer using public transport to get to work. And I think in South Dublin, now that I've been here just over a year, I think, look, our mode share is terrible. It's about 3.8% of people in South Dublin cycle on a regular basis. And I can see, you know, we're increasing in traffic. Our major roads have increased in traffic by 11% over the last 4 years. It's only going to get more and more congested. And so I think it is, you know, Bus Connects, Dart Plus, they're all going to take years to roll out. And so I think cycling is the only short-term option we have, unless we're all going to sit in our cars for, you know, I think the RTE had a good stat there last year. They were talking about, I think the average Dub spent 250 hours a year sitting in their car in traffic in Dublin, which is 11 days. So we've each wasted 11 days sitting in traffic in a sedentary thing. So I think it is critical that we roll this out, you know, at pace, and it can be done because other cities have done it. It's hard, but you know, it's possible.
That's true. It's definitely possible. Jane, would you like to comment on when you realised cycling was part of the solution?
I suppose, look, like talking about my school days again, 50% of the girls in my all-girls school cycled. So,
Ooh.
You know, it was massive. And then, you know, then when I started to cycle, when I was in my 20s, it just suddenly became very clear to me that I wasn't, you know, it wasn't a fair situation that I was in. I was sharing road space with trucks and massive vans, and all of a sudden I was like, why is this the case? Why am I not being catered for? And then I looked around and I saw that there was very few people like me on a bike. So kind of, you know, I got very interested in it then. And then obviously when we started to go into schools, when the program was established in 2008, I realized that cycling culture had been eradicated pretty much, you know, in those last 2 decades. That promoting cycling was just seen as something so outside of the norm. And the fact that people were so terrified of seeing it as an option. So that to me just showed where we were at. And look, you could see it the minute you'd step out onto any town, like, you know, suburban Dublin or the city centre, it was evident. So I suppose being in schools and the schools show are very much a microcosm of what is happening on the bigger scale. And obviously we recognise the fact that if we were going to change the way the city operated, we really had to tackle that big issue. So I suppose that's the background of where we're coming from.
Yeah, I think that kind of leads into the next question. I was going to ask you the whole issue of, you know, it is where agreed cycling is, I would say the solution, but let's just say one of the solutions to our traffic congestion and to other transport issues during the COVID era. And the NTA had a bike life report, and we've heard about it earlier this week from Finola Driscoll in some of our webinars. And you know, it shows very strongly that people cycling in Dublin right now are most likely to be young adults, male or middle class. In fact, I thought they were all three. But there is a preponderance of middle-aged, male, middle-aged, middle class. And, you know, what can be done to get a more diverse range of people to cycle in Dublin? Which maybe while you have the floor, Jane, you carry on, seeing as how you're working on in this area directly.
Well, I suppose, look, we really have to consult with all users. I think that's what we're missing. We're missing that conversation. You know, we have a very structured approach to consulting with the user being me and you and your neighbour, and those who have potentially a desire to cycle or walk or whatever they want to do. So I think, you know, it has to be much more about talking to the user of the future. Like for us, we're very much about trying to include children in the process. I think it's really important that we look at all of our planning from a child's perspective and see how we can plan for them. And once we plan for the child, you know, then we're planning for everybody. So it's critical. And obviously then there's all the people who are maybe outside of, you know, the sector that you see most people cycling in. You have people who are from minority ethnic groups, or people who are, you know, in new migrants into the country. And how do you engage with them and talk to them about how they want to get around the city? Because the city is their space as well, and they're often people who might not have a car. You know, they're people who are very much either, you know, using a bus maybe, but live outside of the city and need to get into the city and might not have, you know, a direct bus link or whatever. So how do you talk to them, and how do you make it an inclusive discussion? And I think that's what, I don't necessarily have the answer, but I think we need to ask that question, and we need to really, before we start planning things, take 5 steps back and really start to see who in the community we need to talk to before we even think about planning anything.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Hugh, I see you have your mic off, so you're obviously dying to come in there.
No, I didn't have it off, no, but anyway, I'll come in now.
Yeah.
For me, it's all about the infrastructure. I think we're kind of fooling ourselves, and I'm including myself very firmly in that, to believe we can entice loads of new people in until we get better infrastructure. You know, the bold reality is we need to pass the Mick test, as he had there. Mick isn't going to cycle until we give him a proper network, and that's right. So we need to pass that test, and then you know, I'd be very comfortable as the NTA. We would definitely do a lot of more promotional campaigns, a lot more educational campaigns, a lot more support campaigns. But you need the product first, and you know, the reality is we don't have the safe cycling network that we need yet. We have plans. You know, to be fair to everyone, for a long number of years, there was no funding there to deliver it. It's only the last couple of years that funding has emerged. And I know later on we're going to discuss how we can accelerate that and push it out. But, you know, fundamentally, we need the right product. The right product is the network. Put that in place, and it's a bit like build it and they will come. I definitely believe then we'll get the types of people that are currently avoiding it coming onto that network once we've got it.
Okay, thanks very much, Hugh. Well, I suppose that brings me to you, Mick. You're planning your network. How do you think we're going to get a more diverse group cycling?
I think the first thing, I am keen that the narrative doesn't build up that it's just white class middle-aged men that cycle, because I don't actually think the stats support that. 24% of people who cycle on a regular basis are white, and 25% are people from an ethnic minority group. So, and that's the stats and evidence from the Bike Life survey. So equally, I think 40% of people are under the age of 25 who cycle, and I think that goes up to over 50% of people under the age of 30. So I think the more narrative that's pushed around it's just white middle-aged men, I think the more it will be seen as a white middle-aged man thing. So actually the evidence of the Bike Life is what I've just said. I'm just looking at the stats here now. So I think we do have to make sure the narrative is right, and that's not all feed into some wrong statistics, is the first point. The second thing, I completely agree with you on the point that you have to build it. And actually, I don't think it's rocket science to know what people will want to cycle on. I mean, look at what that great scheme Dún Laoghaire Down have delivered out in the coastal road. You know, a dedicated two-way segregated cycle lane with lots of space for everybody to cycle on. And it's really, really well used. And I think, you know, kids will go on it. People of all ages will do that. I think if you can roll out that type of infrastructure across your areas, that's the type of infrastructure people will use. And I think I think that point that Jane has around engagement is really interesting. And in some ways I agree with it, in some ways I don't, because the more you ask, in some ways the more you ask people and the more you engage, all that you'll typically find is the people who shout the loudest come forward and shout the loudest. Oh, we don't want it, we don't want it, we don't want it, we love our cars. And they're the ones that get at councillors, and they're the ones that make, oh, listen, I've got a live scheme at the moment where we've got live protests where we're trying to deliver a cycle scheme in Clondalkin. And, you know, there's a real local opposition against any attempt to take away road space for cycling. So I think it's that whole process of engagement and asking people, you just got to be careful that you don't get the answer that you don't want as part of it. I'm not saying that you don't do it, but you know, it can give you an answer that you don't want. And I see Brendan laughing. They've obviously, you know, I know what's going on out at the Sandy Cove area, but you know, yeah, look, I don't know the answer to that, but that's a bit rambly at the end there. But look, that's just some thoughts, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. The challenges you face. And Brendan, how would you get a more diverse range of people cycling?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, I think, because I suppose first of all, just to step back a second, you know, we often see in the Twitter feed something like how many people, you know, in the traffic department and city council cycle. Well, actually, an astonishing amount of people. And as we have more females than males, also an astonishing amount of females cycle here. And also because we have quite a number of people from other countries. We actually have a very diverse range of people. I mean, everybody knows Chris Manzera, who's involved in the cycling project. So we have quite a diverse range of people here in the City Council who cycle. And you could say that, you know, part of our kind of thing is to try and bring that a bit further out. And we, you know, there's a real enthusiasm for cycling. There's a real, sense that, by doing it, you understand it, and by doing it, you set an example. Now, I think where the big problem that we have is this constant car versus cyclists and cyclist versus car debate, which, just as Mick was saying there about various different projects, that's what you get. It's seen, and Mick, you used an interesting term there, taking space away from cars rather than actually, which is what people see it as, rather than actually just saying this is a public space, which is in the public right ownership, and so the way we divide it up and the way we use it should be a matter for the public, not just for one section. And so one of the things that's really been a very positive thing over the last while is some of the work we've done with schools in the last while, particularly say the filtered permeability trial up in Grange Gorman, which has just resulted in a huge flood of kids cycling, parents walking, a real diverse range of people doing it. And you could argue, I was talking to one of the parents who said, well, I don't have a choice, you blocked the road that I used to drive down, so now I have to do this. But they weren't really complaining that much about it. So trying to get that across the whole city, trying to get consultation, and like, this is a term I hear constantly, there was no consultation, there wasn't enough consultation, it wasn't the right type of consultation, you didn't consult me. Owen Keegan always used to say, when he was director of traffic, it's consultation, it's not authorization. So you have to find out what people are concerned about. You have to sift through that and find what's the real stuff, what is actually, you're never going to please everybody, but at some point you have to make a decision, and that's kind of the hardest part. So in order to get more diverse people, you're starting from the base of people who cycle. Now we're starting to see a lot more people taking their kids to school, cycling to school. Maybe that's because people are working from home. There's a real opportunity in that, and that's why we're concentrating for the next while a lot of our time and energy on around the schools, because we think there's an opportunity there, when parents maybe are no longer tied to dropping their kids by car because they're going into work, they're working from home. So this might be their outing, to get out, get some fresh air, and then go back to work. So it's a time to kind of seize that opportunity, I think. So that was pretty rambly as well. So
no. I think that's a very valid point. It's time to seize the opportunity. Kevin, do you want to comment on how to get more diverse people cycling and how we might seize the opportunity at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, like, my thinking about a year ago was very much along the lines of, if we build the right infrastructure, they will come. My thinking has changed a little bit kind of in the last year, particularly because of the research from kind of the Women on Wheels group within Dublin Cycling Campaign, but also the kind of Angie Cycles research that Green Schools have done. And I think it was mostly around kind of women's experience cycling and what were the blockers. And one of the things that kind of came through, it wasn't just the infrastructure, it was that, like, street harassment was a problem they were facing. So to some extent, like, just tackling the hard engineering of the road layout is going to help, but it's not, it's one of many steps, one of many challenges we're going to need to tackle. I think one of the other things I found quite concerning from the Bike Life report was there was a section of the population that said, cycling is not for me. I don't think I will be a cyclist. And when you broke that down by socioeconomic background, people who were more middle class were less likely to say that than people who are working class. And I think Mick is dead right. We need to challenge the narrative on that cycling can be for everyone. And that is a communications problem. It's not an infrastructure problem. So I think there's lots of things we need to do, but I think Hugh is also right. Unless we have a safe cycle network out there, it's kind of a little bit unconscionable to kind of be going out there and saying we should get kids to cycle to school tomorrow if their only option is a big 3-lane road. So it's about trying to find that right balance, but yeah, there's going to be a lot of things on this journey.
Great. Can I respond to
Yes.
Mick?
Yes.
I suppose, I think we need to be very, very imaginative in the type of consultation we do. I know that, there is a public consultation process, and that often results in those negative voices getting to the top and then undermining some of the, the work that's been done in the local authorities. But there's a much, broader community consultation process that we should start thinking about. We've worked with South Dublin before. And sorry, I don't know
the audio just stopped there just a second, but yeah, keep going.
Okay, I was just saying, we worked with schools in Ballyboden, and we worked with South Dublin on this, and we consulted with the schools really heavily, and with the support of the council. And after that, then the council came up with the ideas that the children fed directly into. So we do a lot of stuff around walkability audit, cyclability audit, and this is a consultative process that is fed directly to the local authorities. So I think we just need to be imaginative and not be fearful of hearing those voices. And instead of saying, okay, we've got the network, where we have plans for the network, we need to say, well, what type of network do we want? And as a cyclist and somebody who's cycled with a cargo bike, and a mother who's cycling with kids to school, the network needs to be very varied and offer a whole range of space for varied users. For example, if you're a teenager and you're only learning to cycle, or you're cycling with your mates on the cycle lane, you might want to cycle two abreast. If you're somebody who's got a cargo bike, you might be cycling you need a bigger space. So it's just kind of, before we build it, because we do need to build it, that's for sure. Before we build it, we need to think about all the users and hear their voices, and then let them feed into the design, and assume that maybe we don't know everything. And hopefully we can have an interconnected network as opposed to a linear one. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think that's very valid. And I was at a very interesting session in South Dublin for the Wellington Lane cycle lane, some of which has been done recently, or has been done as a temporary measure. But all the vested interests were asked to come together to a consultation with professional consultants.
We had a mediator in, and a great comms team helping us plan all of that, and sorry, maybe better for you to explain what we did, though, for not for me to promote it, but for you to do it is better.
Well, we were just there were loads of people there, mostly local residents, and then a few people like myself, cycle campaigners, the local residents associations, the various other local organisations, and they sat us round a table, and just at random, and they had a convener who, basically, got out a map of the area and asked us to put dots about where we thought there was dangers, etc. And I think everybody who was there felt it was a wonderful way of drawing out what people thought. And, I'm dying to see the results, to see, does it achieve something that's more in keeping with what people really want and need, than the idea of maybe top-down consultation where you draw up a plan and you present it. So
can I come in on that? I think that's I think the process at Wellington has been really successful, and I'm not, for two reasons. One, I think it has helped shape the scheme to an extent. I think a lot of the ideas that come out, in many ways, because we've got a really good design team working with us, and a lot of that is about getting the right design team who instinctively know what's the right thing for an area, and a great in-house team and a great project manager on this one. I think so that helped us facilitate a really good discussions with local people. There were ideas that came to us that maybe we hadn't thought about, but I think for us as a council, and for me, what's helped me through that process is actually it's got the councillors engaged. And it's got the councillors to the place where they can see local people want it. And that's really, really helped, because now I've got councillors, rather than in other schemes when I joined where councillors saying, oh, we don't want it, we don't want it, we don't want it. They're now saying, well, actually, you had hundreds of people feeding into a process that they're now asking me as my councillor, where's the scheme? Which is a complete turnaround from where we were 12 months ago. So for me, that process of engagement, yes, it's identified things that have helped shift and move within the scheme, but it's brought councillors much more engaged into the process, and they see that there is other voices out there that do want these things to happen, and it's not just the I'm going to shout loudest when I'm on a statutory consultation, I don't like it, therefore please councillor vote this down. So for me, that's been the biggest benefit of the engagement. And I don't want to detract from what you're kind of getting at, Jane, but that's my own take on it.
Can I ask you a question here? So is the
Yeah.
consultation, is it asking the question, should we do the project, or is it asking the question, how should we do this project?
Yeah, it's asking. So what we were very clear about in the consultation is where the community had an opportunity to influence stuff. We said, look, these bits are fixed. Look, we want to achieve this. We want to get from A to B. This is where you have the opportunity to feed into it. This is where we think it's fixed. And I think once we set that parameters for people and they understood, and there was some big areas where there was flex in it, and people then focused their efforts on, right, actually we could do that, and then people really got into talking about, oh, actually maybe we'll put a playground at this junction and we'll square that off and we'll put some grass. And then all of a sudden people are talking about that and they get quite excited about that element, and the whole cycling versus car thing kind of gets left to the side, and it's like, oh, actually we could get a playground as part of this as well. That's just one example on one corner, but it was fixed things. Here's where you can influence.
But Mick, you gave them ownership. You allowed people to take ownership of that project and to invest in it, emotionally invest in it. And I mean, it's not rocket science, I suppose, in terms of how you can do consultation. I used to do it in a previous job, and it's just allowing people the opportunity to get involved often, and allowing them, as I said, to take ownership and have investment in it.
I agree.
Yeah, no, it's not rocket science, but I think it does cost money. So yeah, but I think
not that much.
Yeah,
not that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, yeah, money, but not in the grand scheme of things.
Can I ask Hugh a question here? So one of the things I heard from the Commuter Coalition was they found it very hard for their members, who are to some extent people who were kind of commuting for an hour plus a day, who were interested in public transport investment, found it very difficult to get to a lot of the Bus Connects meetings that were kind of scheduled at like 6:30, 7 p.m. in the evening after work. And many parents as well told us that they found it very difficult to get to those meetings because it's a difficult time trying to get kids to dinner or to training or to bed. Do we need to think about alternative times for kind of meetings like this to get a broader group of consultation?
I think one of the benefits of COVID is exactly where we are today. Most of it is online, so it tends to give you more flexibility. So, for instance, at the moment there's consultations running for Lewis to Finglas and for Dart expansion out towards Maynooth. Both of those are online consultations, no in-person sessions, and the people involved have been able to organise webinars at convenient times. And particularly when people don't have to travel from home to a venue, it's so much easier to, you can log on at 6:30, much easier than it is to travel X kilometres and get to a venue for 6:30. So I think one of the benefits of COVID, if there is such a thing, has been that there's a greater acceptance of online type engagement like this, and it does offer the flexibility that you're actually asking for there. And there are a few exceptions to that. We've had people complaining that elderly people who don't have access to the internet or say they don't have access feel excluded. So there are some downsides, but in general, an online approach like this, it offers the type of flexibility that I think benefits most people.
Yeah, I think it's true that communications are changing as we speak. Maybe we'll come on to another question we have here is how do we increase the momentum of cycling infrastructure delivery? Anybody want to volunteer to take this one on?
Well, maybe I should start with that one.
Okay,
since most of the funding and that gets routed through us. So I did say earlier on that we all know that for a number of years the funding wasn't there for cycle delivery. Then in the last couple of years funding has emerged. The bottleneck that was occurring was, well, we've no pipeline of schemes ready to go, number one, and number two, the primary delivery agencies are the local authorities, and they don't have resources to spare to be able to do the type of work that's required. So how do we accelerate things? We are putting together different components of a plan, but central to it is going to be more resources for local authorities dedicated to sustainable transport. A team in each of South Dublin, Dublin City, an expanded team, I should say, because there is a team there already in each of the local authorities in the Dublin area, with a sole remit to do active travel projects. There needs to be support behind that from us, which there will be on various things, and the funding is there. The programme for government that came out in June, you all know, is the most ambitious sustainable transport programme that's been put forward to date in Ireland, and actually the challenge is delivering on it. So it's those arrangements, local authority resource and funding are two of the key parts. The third part then I would say is that what we build is also probably has to evolve a little bit. As some of you possibly know, we've now developed a quicker way of doing cycle tracks using what's called extruded concrete curbs out in Dún Laoghaire and out in Griffith Avenue in the Dublin City area. And if a road is wide enough, that's a way you can build segregated cycling very, very quickly. And we see a role for that in being rolled out across the region and delivering more quicker. Now, it's not a perfect answer to everything, and I'm sure lots of members of the audience today will have issues with bits and pieces of it, but it is definitely getting a lot more done a lot quickly. And lastly, for me, the last piece of the jigsaw is to simplify some of the projects, that the planning process becomes a little bit more streamlined, and that's got a lot of meanings to it there. But essentially, as a lot of people will know, some of our larger projects, cycling projects, have been stuck in what you have to call a planning process effectively for quite a long time, and we have to find a way of simplifying that and taking some of them out of it. I'll stop at that because that's just to give an overview from my perspective what the things are.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. Would you like to make any comment, Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, like what Hugh is saying is you know, is all good from our point of view. You know, I think one of there is a lot of issues to how you accelerate, but it's worth kind of reflecting on the fact that we did lose so much time due to the financial crash. And you know, a real element for us was, you know, we completed the first section of the Grand Canal cycle route back in 2013, but we didn't really add any more to it till now, till this year, you know, for a combination of reasons to do with funding and then how long it takes to move them along. So I suppose what's exciting at the moment is the fact that we now probably have a range of ways of doing cycling infrastructure, or you know, putting in some cycling infrastructure, improving what's there, because I suppose, you know, when we look at particularly the city, there was a lot of cycling lanes put in as part of the various different QVCs. They weren't necessarily protected, or most of them were not protected. A lot of them were in bus lanes, some of them were in car lanes, but there was an awful lot of it. And I suppose one of the things that we've been doing, and we started pre-COVID, was really to start thinking about protecting those lanes that were there. So we didn't necessarily have to reinvent quite, you know, a lot of the areas. We just had to make the protection better, and we'd already started that process at places like Leeson Street and so on pre-COVID. So there is, and you know, we've been discussing it, myself and Hugh, there is a range of approaches which you know, perhaps now focus more on delivering improvements for cycling, and maybe saying that, you know, we can improve, you know, up to 80% quite quickly. The next sections may take longer, but whereas previously we may have gone for a scheme that improved everything in one go, but which was so complex and involved so much consultation and so much civil works, drainage works, you know, sustainable urban drainage, all this kind of stuff, that it really takes a long time to deliver. So now we're kind of looking at, you know, how do you actually, over a 5-year plan, you know, you might improve or make things safer, make things more protected, you know, in your first year or two, but by the time you're finishing your plan, you've actually gone back and tackled some of the harder elements. So it's kind of looking at, you know, rolling out stuff quickly. So, you know, since COVID has happened, we've put in either new cycle routes or protected existing ones. Somewhere in the order of about 11 kilometers of that has been done, which, when you consider prior to that, how long it was taking us to deliver any kind of significant improvement because of the complexities of projects or because of the complexities of approaches. So there's merit in both, and don't get us wrong, we need both. We need some really big infrastructure changes, some really big projects, and so they're going to continue on, but we're also certainly going to continue the more rapid deployment and maybe have a kind of a halfway house between your big permanent project and your very rapid deployment one, which will gain a lot of traction, I think, and attract a lot of people to cycling, and hopefully deliver that a lot quicker.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Kevin, do you want to make any comment on that?
Yeah, I suppose like one of the things I focus on a lot in the cycling campaign is kind of tracking all the infrastructure projects across Dublin. I think there's actually 136 different cycling projects across the 4 local authorities that are in some stage of the process right now. Not all of them are NTA funded. Some of them are kind of new road schemes, but it's interesting to see how much there is moving. But at the same time, yeah, Brendan some of the projects have stalled or gotten kind of stuck in many bits along the way. I think there's 2 projects that kind of stand out to me, and I don't want to call out Dublin City Council because I know they're actually working really hard on them, but it shows how much other stakeholders are involved in these projects. One was the Royal Canal, the new section that just opened was planning approval December 2015, 2014. It's about 5 years ago, but involved a lot of consultation with Irish Rail, Waterways Ireland, the NTA, its interplay with Dart Plus West, and all of those kind of really complicated stuff slowed that project down quite a lot. And then we saw a similar kind of problem happen with kind of Fitzwilliam, where the Fitzwilliam cycle route is 1 kilometre long, parking protected cycle route. In theory, it's a relatively quick, easy build. But then there was some water main issues that were kind of bundled into the project. And then we also saw kind of, did Bus Connects interplay with that route? Yes or no? Does that change the design? Yes or no? And to some extent, we have so many different overlapping transport projects in the city centre and so many different stakeholders. It can sometimes be interesting to see there's so many layers of planning to get these things right that it's kind of holding us back. I don't know what we do about it, but I think it's one of the things we kind of need to bear in mind as we start planning out these new routes.
Yeah, I mean, look, Royal Canal Phase 2 was one of the most complex ones. I mean, it goes over a live railway and it goes under another live railway. It also delivers a complete linear park, a floating pontoon for kayaking, as well as, quite considerable benefits. Now,
oh no, the project's fantastic. It is one of the best things we've ever delivered in Dublin.
So, and unfortunately it opened right in the middle of COVID. So all the people who work down the financial services centre, instead of being on their bikes using it, are clearly sitting in their houses, in front of their laptops. But I think, it is a constant frustration for us as well, because we have so many different things to think about. So Fitzwilliam, one of the good news about Fitzwilliam is that because there's so much, we have a big interplay with an Irish Water project and, as I say, Bus Connects and so on. We're actually going to roll that out as a rapid deployment scheme over the next while, and come back later on and do the full scheme. So one of the things that I suppose we're looking at is doing that where, previous to this, you'd go through the whole process, you try and have it from end to end, you try and get everything into it, which would mean that you're dealing with, the architects, the planners, the architectural historians, etc., particularly in Fitzwilliam. So there's huge issues about trying to touch anything there, trying to put anything in place in the road. And then you have the fact that somebody wants to dig a water main or renew a water main right in the middle of your project. So you can't ignore these things. And it seems it can be very frustrating, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to protect some cyclists, you're trying to take some roadway, and suddenly you're getting bound up with all those other projects. So I suppose, it's something the City Council has been very conscious of, and, we're setting up a new program steering group at quite high level, specifically to drive those forward and to try and weed out those particular problems at an earlier stage. And, as I say, it may be that we're not delivering 100% of everything that we should be right at the start. But what we want to do is we want to try and reverse the project, not reverse it, but we want to try and say, right, how do we capture the maximum benefit for cycling, and how do we do that quickly while coming back later on potentially in some cases and actually delivering the entire end-to-end scheme. So we're trying to, I suppose, take some of the elements of what's been achieved, you know, in COVID, which you know, some of them are quite temporary. As Hugh was saying, we've experimented with extruded curbing out in Griffith Avenue, which works quite well. So we're going to be putting some of those in the city centre over the next couple of weeks as well. So it's kind of a halfway house between some of our beloved bollards and a permanent you know, curb with all that goes with it, with all the drainage, with all the footpaths and everything else. And I suppose bear in mind, like when you're in the city, you know, we've got everything from heritage to trees, you know, to I mean, even the simple Werburgh Street you know, contraflow scheme has run up against some architectural issues, you know, from our heritage department. Even though it's a fairly straightforward light segregation, it does go past some of the ancient or the best listed buildings. So there's an issue there. But you know, when we're looking at this, again, it's kind of trying to say, you know, there are multiple projects out there. As they get delivered, as the big ones get delivered, they have a huge impact. So, you know, going back to the Canalway, when we delivered that in 2012, 2013, which was in the middle of the recession, the fact that, you know, we got money from the government to deliver at that stage, you know, all the way from Portobello all the way around to Seville Place was a huge, it was, you know, it was the biggest input into cycling at the time. But once we deliver that, you could actually see the takeoff in cycling as a result of that. So there was a kind of, and Eamon Ryan, when he was on the webinar last night, he mentioned the fact that 20 years ago there was an attitude of don't build infrastructure. Actually, you know, that the cyclist should be on the road and should be treated as a road vehicle, and that was very much, there was an element of, you know, don't segregate them, don't treat them as a separate, treat them with, you know, almost mixing them, and you know, now that we've started to build far more of the segregated ones, you know, you can see the benefit of that. So even as we segregate the existing you know, tracks, even with some fairly light segregation, you can actually see, I mean, it's one of the few things that people write to me to compliment us on is the fact that we've done some of those, because people say it's allowed us to get from A to B a lot safer. Now, they're really tricky to implement because unfortunately what's built up over the years is because we didn't have that segregation, the cycle tracks have been used for everything from parking to loading. And, you know, when businesses are reopening after COVID and they find a row of bollards outside their premises, which stop people driving to them or which stop, as they would see it, people loading, you know, their fear factor goes through the roof. So that's, you know, and one of the things that we've done is we've set up a separate liaison team for businesses, you know, completely separate from our project team, whose job it is to contact them and see what can be done, what, you know, how, like, if we put in perfect cycle lanes all throughout the city and we've absolutely no business left at the end of it, we'll have failed as you know, we'll have failed the city and we'll have failed the citizens. So therefore, you know, we have to, you know, it's a tricky approach, and over a period of time, we need to be bringing in other measures such as, you know, the managed deliveries, the whole issue of how, you know, people get serviced, how do you keep a city going. So sometimes when people say to us, well, can you not just, you know, segregate this off completely? Well, no, actually, because you've got deliveries, you've got loading, and you've also got a real thing in the city called private landings where people actually own the footpath, not us. So, you know, there's a range of complexities. So it's not an excuse for not delivering things quicker. I mean, we would much prefer to be delivering a lot more things quicker. And as Hugh rightly says, you know, now the funding is available. A couple of years ago, there was very, very little funding available for any of the projects that we were talking about. We could do the design work, but there wasn't money for the construction element.
And if I could just come back, if I could just come back on to Kevin.
We're running short on time, but keep going, Hugh. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just two quick things. One is just picking up Brenda's last point. Yes, back in 2015, we didn't have the 9 million available to build that piece of the Royal Canal. That was the reality then. And secondly, the issue about coordination. I saw one of the chats floating through there. People that don't realise there actually is a surprising amount of coordination across the transport bodies. So part of the reason for setting the NTA up was to provide for that coordination. So when it comes to Irish Rail, when it comes to Dublin Bus, when it comes to Bus Éireann and so on, we are able to sort all of those things out. We have a power of direction in reserve if we didn't, which we'd never have to use. So they're not the impediments any longer. I'll stop, Mairéad, because I realise you're tight for time.
Okay, we're tight for time. I'm just going to throw out one last question, and I'll start with Mick on this one. Where do you see Dublin in 5, 10, 15 years' time?
Well, I'll speak for South Dublin. And what I would hope is that over the next 10 years, we'll deliver close to 30 projects in South Dublin, which will deliver 200 kilometres of new or significantly improved cycle lanes within the county. Exactly what form and design they'll take, we don't know, but that's the intention, and we're structuring that around a now, soon and later programme. And we're in discussions with Hugh's team about the now projects, those projects that fit in there, and over the next 5 years, and wrapping a programme, you know, a credible, deliverable programme around that. And I really like the rapid deployment that Brendan's talked about, being a part of trialing. You know, what the intention would be that we might trial future projects where we think we have a bit of an idea about where they might go, but we can trial them over time. And equally, Jane's bit, you know, paramount to all of those projects will be the type of engagement that we've done in Wellington to date, so that there is community input into that. But I think that's where we would want to be, delivering and upgrading 200 kilometres of cycle lanes across South Dublin over the next 10 years.
Thanks very much, Mick. Maybe I'll ask you, Jane, where do you see us in 5, 10 or 15 years?
Hopefully with a lot less congestion. That's the one thing I'd look for. But no, for us, you know, the role that we have, we want schools to be prioritised. You know, we want schools to be seen as cycle hubs, whereby the network radiates out from schools and into the suburbs and into the city, so that kids can actively get to school independently. And we also really want like a transport interchange effect, you know, a multimodal approach, so that secondary school students are using the bus maybe on bus connects, but then they're going to either walk or possibly hop on the bike to get to their secondary school, because remember, secondary schools have much bigger catchment areas, and often parents continue to drive their kids to school because there's a lack of connectivity between where they live and where they go to school. So I would love if we could do that, if we could focus on the schools and radiate out. I'd also really love if we could have a consistency of approach. You know, all the local authorities have their own policies and their own development plans, and however, you know, you go from one local authority area to the other, and as a cyclist, you know, it's hard to read the landscape sometimes because there's a different approach to how you deliver your cycle infrastructure. So that consistency of approach would be brilliant, I think. And also we have to look at the aesthetic quality of our cycling infrastructure. It also has to look nice. I know that, you know, we often forget that, you know, it might have a function, but our city should also be an attractive place to be. So I hope that that can be built into any design concepts, you know, going into the future. And also not to look at our cycling network in isolation. Think about the walkers, the fact that we also need a really good quality pedestrian crossing and pedestrian infrastructure, so that those people who don't want to cycle have the opportunity to walk. So I suppose, and also I'm delighted to hear that Hugh, you know, is talking about increasing capacity in the local authorities. You know, we really find that we try and work with the local authorities, and often there isn't the capacity there for, you know, the staff to be able to engage with us, and it'd be fantastic. But also not to duplicate the work that, you know, the behaviour change programs that are already in existence, but to try and integrate it. And I'd love to see the Grand Canal cycleway extended. My kids, you know, are growing up rapidly, and they are on the cycle route and they're cycling with large trucks beside them, and I'm trying to get them to cycle and keep them cycling, but I don't know if they will when they're cycling on their own. But yeah, that would be my hope, and my I'd love to see if we could work together more so that we can have that vision come to fruition.
Mairéad,
very
can I
much,
just
Jane.
come in on? Can I
Yeah,
just,
come on,
sorry
Mick,
to do,
yeah,
can I come in on
yeah.
one point, which Jane reminded me of there, and Hugh had mentioned earlier. The issue that we have in the local authority around staff isn't that we haven't got the funding for the staff, or that the NTA won't fund it. It's literally that we cannot get people. We literally cannot get properly qualified designers and engineers. I've got 12 technical vacancies in my transport department.
But I suppose there's a catch up there, Mick. You know, for a long time there wasn't the funding there to take on people.
Yeah.
No, and I think there's a huge amount of catch up there, and it's brilliant that there are those positions available now.
Yeah, we have the positions, but we don't have the people. And so things like, rapid deployment that Brendan talks about, all those great things, like we've got to make difficult decisions in South Dublin about where we put our people. I've got 4 people to work on cycle, and we've redirected them onto all of this stuff, but 4 people to deliver a rapid deployment of COVID measures, whatever it might be. It's not enough. And it's not that the money isn't there, it's that we can't get the people. We literally can't. And then when we have projects underway, we don't have the consultants. There isn't a capacity in the engineering consultant network, to actually come in and do the design for you. So it's the biggest issue is resource, I think.
They're all working for Google.
They're all working for Google.
Well, they may be glad of a job. Things may change. Maybe we'll ask Kevin, where do you see Dublin and fairly quickly, we need to finish soon.
Yeah, I'll do a quick answer. I honestly think in the next 5 years, we could deliver what I might consider a backbone of a cycle network in Dublin. We're not that far off to some extent, connecting all the way from Sutton to Sandy Cove with one protected cycle route. Similarly, we're not that far off from kind of finishing the Royal Canal, finishing the Grand Canal. And with that, you have 3 big strands that stretch from the suburbs all the way into the city centre. I think that's totally doable in the next 5 years. In 15 years, I'd hope to see modal share of maybe, 8%, 12%, depending how we're counting it. I think we could see 25 or 30% of people cycling in Dublin if we kind of deliver on all the ambition that we have here for kind of not just the cycling projects, but also look at kind of Metrolink, Lewis to Finglas and Dart Plus, and how the interplay between kind of cycling and public transport is going to make both of those much more attractive. So yeah, I think we could huge numbers in 15 years.
Okay, thanks very much, Kevin. Brendan, do you want to give a quick 30 seconds?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of projects which will come to fruition over, say, the next 10 to 15 years. Metro is an obvious one, Dart Plus and so on. And, what's a shame, what always annoys me is the fact that, the Metro was originally meant to open in 2016. If we had a Metro, so think of the 3 big projects we were working on: Dart Underground, Metro North, and Lewis Cross City. The other 2 of them got cancelled. Lewis Cross City went in. So we still have no underground element. Everything we're trying to do is with the same space in the city as we've always had. And it won't be probably till 2027, 2028 that we really see a significant underground mass transit system in Dublin. So that's a real challenge. But just stepping back, you kind of asked about what city rather than what cycling, right? And I don't know actually anymore what kind of city we're going to have in 5 years' time, because what's happened over the last 6 months has been so dramatic, traumatic as well, I think, to, obviously to a lot of people, but it's been so dramatic. And it's, the issue I think we face is how much of this is actually permanent. So I think one of the issues for the city, and one of the things that we've been doing with, say, our COVID stuff, is we've been far more concentrating on linking our urban villages to the city centre, and also then starting to think about linking our schools together and our schools to urban villages than previously, where we were thinking of ourselves as almost sucking everybody into the core of the city centre from the surrounding areas. We're no longer seeing that pattern of commuting at the moment, so the strange thing is we're not seeing very many cyclists, we're not seeing very many walkers anymore, we're not seeing a lot of pedestrians, a lot of cyclists coming across the canal cordon during the peak hours, but we're seeing them off peak. So I'm not too sure what that means, but that's the, you know, so cycling numbers are down to about 30% of what they were previously in the peak hours, right? So very, very, and pedestrian numbers are down, on some routes they're down to 10% of what they were. So these are staggering change in what's happening in the city centre. So in 5 years' time, if those kind of changes are made permanent, the city could actually be a much nicer place, because we're no longer just these big corridors sucking people into the city centre, into big complexes. So I think the city is actually, over the next, you know, year to 2 years, actually could significantly change the way it is. Now, it's not a pleasant place for a lot of people in the city centre, because there isn't enough footfall at the moment. But having said that, you know, there is an opportunity, I think, to rethink the purpose of the city centre of Dublin, and by extension that goes through the neighbourhoods that feed into the city. So the urban villages of Rathmines and Raheny and all these places which act as conduits at the moment, there may be a possibility to start looking at those as nodes and connecting nodes, not to the city centre but to each other. So as they say about the French Revolution, it's too early to say its impact. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I don't know what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 years' time.
Sorry,
Okay.
can I, sorry, Mairéad, just on Brendan's point, I just think it's so true that we have to start looking at livability, you know, and not this commuting pattern that we built our city up on, and looking at where we're having the green spaces, and also why our planning, you know, why we're planning for a certain type of accommodation in our city, when maybe we need to look more about should we have more families in the city centre to make it that viable, livable place, that 10-minute, 15-minute city model that people are starting to really, really look at. So I think the next 5 or 10 years is just going to be strangely different, but also the potential to do so much more and rethink our models of how cities are is really exciting, and especially when we have such an urgency around climate action, and it's a massive, even though we have to do it.
Yeah. Okay. We're way over time, but I better let Hugh have the last word, Hugh.
That's great. I can say what I like now. No, nobody can come back at me. Okay. No, just two things. But one is on the resources side that Mick mentioned there. That is the position, or was the position up to a couple of months ago. Just to say, I'm more optimistic now that one of the consequences of COVID is that a lot of commercial developments are not proceeding, and some signals we're getting that engineering design firms will have more capacity available. So I'm feeling a bit more optimistic that we will get some extra resources in to do the kind of things that need to be done. In terms of where we'll be in a period of time, I'm going to pick a 7-year period, simply because that matches the end of the Bus Cadets program. And at that stage, I'm genuinely saying I do believe we're going to have all of the primary routes that are in our cycle network in Dublin completed, and I would say most of the secondary routes. And many of you that know that forms the whole backbone of the network. And I genuinely, it's not a platitude, everybody here, I genuinely think we're capable of doing that now. We have the funding, we have the commitment behind it. If we can get the resources that's mentioned, I do believe that that's what we'll achieve in about 7 years.
That's great. We all look forward to that. And with that, I'd like to say thanks very much to all our panelists. Thanks very much to all our audience. Is that the right word for webinar participants? Thanks very much to those who have attended webinars earlier in the week. We've had a series of them from the Dublin Cycling Campaign and a few of the other campaigns around the country. I'd like to say a very special thank you to Conor Cahill and Vinnie Miner of the Dublin Cycling Campaign, who have kept the Zoom machine going. All I've had to do was just sign in and talk. So thanks very much to everybody. I hope everybody has had a good bike week, and I hope we'll all be able to get out on our bikes at the weekend. And before I go, I think Conor Cahill wants to make an announcement.
Thanks a million, Mairéad, and just thanks a million, Jane, Mick, Kevin, Hugh and Brendan. I really appreciate it. And thanks a million also to Vinny for literally keeping the whole show on the road. And thanks, Mairéad, for keeping everything really fluid and keeping everything going. So thanks a million. I just wanted to flag just one, well, there's probably still a whole lot of events for Bike Week, but I just want to flag a virtual screening of Motherload that's been organised by the Galway Cycling Campaign. And it's they're also having a they're calling it a co-video party, and then a Zoom Q&A with the director, Liz Canning. And that's, if you go on to dublincycling.com/bikeweek, I'll share it in the chat if I can multitask. It's an amazing documentary with people who, in the States of all places, who realize that cargo bikes actually, answer an awful lot of questions to them. And it'll be amazing to be able to attend a Q&A with the director, Liz Canning. And I think it's Galway City Council that have funded it, so that it's actually a free screening. People will be able to watch it remotely. And then also, sorry, on that website, it's on the dublincycling.com/bikeweek 2020. We have already put up the videos of all the previous webinars, and we'll be putting up the video of this one as well. So feel free to go back and catch any of the amazing ones that you might have missed, and to share this one with other friends and colleagues. That'll be brilliant. And Vinny has just asked me to mention, there's this is for members only for the Dublin Cycling Campaign. There's a 2020 Dublin Cycling Campaign annual members meeting, and that's on the 15th of October. And just make sure you're signed up to the newsletter, or check in social media or on the website for more information about that. This has been quite a week. That's about 7 webinars that we've held, myself and Vinny have helped coordinate. I badly need some hydration after this. I'm really sorry that we can't all do it together, but I really hope we'll find a way of doing it soon with a glass of water. I have a beer in the fridge, Jane, don't worry. But hopefully we'll all get to see each other soon, and maybe we can go for a cycle together and all the new networks that are coming. Thank you. Well done.
And can we get Mick on that cycle?
I hope so.
That's a challenge. This time next year,
we can take the trainer.
I like
we can
Hugh,
take the trainer wheels off.
will it pass the Mick test? Yeah, exactly. That could become if that becomes a thing, I'd be very happy with that.
It at least needs to be a hashtag, if not going on a t-shirt, I'm sure, Mick.
Okay, thanks very much,
Thanks a million, Mairéad.
Thank you.
See you all again in person
Good luck,
soon.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.